Think of the biggest city you've been to. Now, choose a spot that really sticks out to you and hold it in your mind. What's around you? What do you see? Streets, cars, trees, buildings, restaurants, gazebos. Is there water nearby? Now, instead of asking yourself, what is there, I want you to ask, why? Why is that building built that way? Why does that street run in that direction? Why is that bench that color? You see, even if the stories might be mundane, understanding the stories of why architecture is the way it is enriches our understanding of the world as a whole, helps us come to a better scope just how much is in the world around us. Now, this is a concept that applies in games too, even if the same tree has been copy pasted 4,800 times. There's a story there. There's a story as to why it was copy pasted 4,800 times. Is it meant to be a reflection of something in the universe? Is it just easy to do and needed to happen fast? Those stories are relevant. And the more that we understand about those stories, the more we understand about the games we love. And there's probably an Elden Ring or Souls-like otherwise fanatic who feels really understood right now. Our next speaker is someone who uses architecture as an opportunity for time travel. Dr. Katrina Starks is a games researcher who has co-developed a bachelor's in serious games, has developed an interactive narrative minor, has participated in multiple grant proposals, and has taught games at both the undergraduate and graduate level. He's here to have a discussion about world building and architecture. Please welcome to the stage, Dr. Katrina Starks.
Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Katrina Starks, and I'm here with World Building Through Time, Architecture that Tells Stories. I'm going to start you off with the reason that this talk was inspired. I went over to Portugal for my job. My university has a partnership with Lusofona University in Portugal, and so we went over to meet them. As I was walking out of the university, I saw this picture that you see in front of you. What caught my eye was this ancient looking gate here, the wall, the brick is obviously really old. And I thought, I wonder how old that is. So I went back and I was looking at my pictures. And the thing that made this fascinating to me was not just the old brick that you see, but also the really new stucco right next to it. And so I realized that not only was I looking at something very old, I was possibly looking at something very new. And I wondered how many years are in this picture. So I contacted my friends and they told me that what I was looking at was called a Fernandine wall. It was in Porto, Portugal, and that wall used to surround the entire city, and it was actually built in 1376. I could not get a time on the stucco next to it, but obviously that's much newer. And so I thought about the way that we present worlds in video games and how basically, if you see a cyberpunk world, that all looks futuristic. If you see an ancient world, it all looks ancient. And that's not actually how things are built in our world. We actually have things that are very old. And the only way we get an entirely new city is if, for some reason, the entire city was destroyed. Otherwise, or if someone has the money to take everything down and put it back up with newer architecture. Basically, what really happens is we build on top of what we've got. Another example later on, same city. I saw this, which is that lovely Fernandine wall that you see, along with something that looks like it used to be a fortress. But there's also some very interesting buildings in the back. There's a dome, which may or might even be older than the wall, I'm not sure. And then on the sides and in the back, you see some modern looking office buildings. And then there are the cars in the front. And so the Fernandine walls we know were built in 1376. And I think the newest thing in the picture are the Velo bikes. Velo was founded in about 2014. And then I took this picture in 2024, which means that there are 640 years in this picture. We are literally looking through time. I could probably tell you an entire story about the city, which makes a city of character of its own, just by looking at this picture and tracing when everything was built and what everyone has gone through. Of course, the walls are thick because that's how they had war. Those walls had to withstand cannonballs and people trying to scale them. And then, of course, you see the glass and white structure, which means obviously there's not as much of a threat, for instance. So that's a small story about the city that you can tell just through the architecture. Obviously, you can see from this slide, these are two parts of the same city. On the left, the city is very old. These structures were actually built before Portugal was founded. And then on the right, you see something that looks much more modern, including a metro. The thing about these pictures is not only are they the same city, they were taken in the exact same spot. On the left, I was leaning over the banister of the railing that you can see. And then on the right, I turned around and put my camera up and took a picture of the other side of that same bridge. So again, we've got old structures and then we've got new structures, and they're built right next to each other without tearing the whole thing down. Again, in video games, I've seen things on the left a lot. Usually they're in the jungles, they fly out there and it's a very remote place, and then they fly back out and go to some place that looks like on the right. And so it's not quite the depiction of cities as they are. We don't always have to go out and find these places remotely. Next, we have another example, also within Lisbon. This is Lusofana in Lisbon, Portugal, and this building has been newly painted, but it's actually very old. It's been there for a while. And not only do we see the architecture outside of the different buildings that show buildings through time, but since this is a university, there's a dichotomy between what's inside the building and what's outside the building. So we have a very old building, but inside we have things going on like this. So of course, this is very modern. We've got someone who's doing mocap inside of the university. And so once again, we've repurposed these old buildings and put very new things inside of them. Moving over to Rome, what you see here is the old and new juxtaposed as well. Inside of this building, you can see a statue. It's very new, but it's designed to look old. And then there's a mosaic on a wall, which looks like it's a little bit older. Underneath this restaurant, they found a wall that was one of the original Roman, it's actually a road, I'm sorry. It's one of the original Roman roads, very, very old. And then on the bottom, right, what you see is what they did to preserve that road. They have this restaurant and they built glass over the old road so that people can see the old as they walk around the new. Now, this restaurant also has a story. It was very controversial when it opened in Rome. It opened in March 20th, 1986. And when it was opened, a famous fashion designer petitioned the courts to get it closed. Also, a group of concerned citizens called the Save Rome Committee protested in front of it by standing outside cooking spaghetti, perfectly al dente, of course. The reason why they did not like this restaurant being in their city was they thought that it would destroy the culture of their city. And so there were rules about the architecture. The reason why it looks so old on the inside is because they were forced to basically, when in Rome, do as the Romans do. And they were even toned down on the outside. So inside, this looks like an amazingly wonderful restaurant that's probably pretty fancy, but it's actually McDonald's in Rome, the very first one. As you can see, even on the outside, they've toned down their usual red and yellow, and they're blending in with the environment. Another example of them having the old and the new. Moving over to Poland, The Witcher 3 was actually modeled off of Gdansk, Poland, and you can see the Poland structure, and then you can see the docks in Novigrad, which is The Witcher 3's fictional city. And you can see lots of similarities. Now, in The Witcher 3, you can see Novigrad, and again, you see that dock in Gdansk, and you see The Witcher 3. And that architecture looks pretty old, and I would say there's probably a few different years in there, but it kind of looks like it's in the same time period. However, while we're in Poland, this is the real. So we've got Polytechnic University, which you would imagine would be in a building like what you see on the right, and it is. But it's also part of the campus is the building on the left. So again, they started in their old campus, and then someone built a new building, and they were able to expand. Another thing that they've done in Gdansk, Poland, is they have the Museum of the Second World War. This is a modern looking building. It's slanted, lots of glass. And you might wonder, why in the world would they have such a new looking building that houses such old things? Well, Poland held a contest in 2012 for studios to design the building. And originally, it was designed to look like a shipyard. Most of the shipyard is still there. You can see it a little bit on the bottom, but this structure looks very modern. I think another interpretation of this modern structure holding something really old could be as a warning. The Second World War, of course, contained several atrocities, and putting it in a modern building could signal to people that this is not something that we should forget. This is something that could happen in our modern world if we don't actually take steps to make sure that it doesn't. And so you've got the new with the warning of possibly not repeating the atrocities that the old contains. So as you can see by this slide, this is a fictional cyberpunk city. One artist depicted the same city with 3 different lighting structures. Now, the first city looks like a regular day. Obviously, the freeway sign shows it's Los Angeles. The second picture shows a building with a different lighting structure, which makes it look like it could be the daytime, but this is more cyberpunk. It looks very futuristic. And then, of course, we see the third picture, which is the way that we see cyberpunk cities depicted a lot. So there's a little bit of a difference in the third one. It looks very futuristic, and the entire thing looks pretty futuristic. In the middle, it's a departure from the purple night kind of a phase by making it look like it's brightly lit and day. So cyberpunk, but maybe not dystopian. And then there's the first picture. In reality, the first picture is probably how we would build. We have our old structures, and as you can see, there's signage that's kind of tacked on. The cars are a little bit more modern, but we have built on our existing structures in order to modernize. So flying cars on a building that looks quite old. And so a lot of people would think, oh, we're going to go with the third picture or the third lighting structure. But the first is actually more authentic. And here are some examples of cities in real games. So this is We Happy Few, and We Happy Few has districts. So these are 4 different places within We Happy Few. However, you have to travel to get to each district. They're not that far apart, but they're not exactly together. Similarly, this is The Witcher 3. We see 4 different districts, 4 different cities, and they look pretty much the same once you're in each city, and each city is farther apart. Now, the island, definitely you would need to travel to get there, but the rest of these could actually be mixed up a little bit for a more realistic setting. That concludes my talk. Thank you for joining me today, and I hope that you enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you for that talk, Dr. Starks. Kind of wild to see all of the layers of storytelling that you could unpack just by looking at a single McDonald's, right? There's a whole world building story in that McDonald's, as opposed to some of the McDonald's over here, which just have a weird white brick-ish wall with the words delicious burger on them. I don't know what the delicious burger story is, but I think if I learn it, it would make me sad. Regardless, I think that applying this curiosity to game worlds, not just exploring them, but also creating them, bringing that richness to the game space, really does open up our opportunities for brand new explorations. Thank you so much for your talk, Dr. Starks. If you would like to keep up with her, you can find her on LinkedIn at Dr. Katrina Starks.